I think what's happened, some people could disagree with me. I would even disagree with myself. But I think that the woman caught in the act of adultery has quickly become one of my favorite examples. And what I realize is I could preach every aspect of the gospel from the woman caught in the act of adultery. There's many things you could say about that. Just to maybe, some of you guys have heard me talk about this a lot, but to give you another wrinkle, the woman caught in the act of adultery is not just talking about that woman and her committing physical adultery. If you read in the Old Testament, it talks about Israel and mankind having committed adultery on God. And they didn't commit adultery on God by laying with some physical person. They committed adultery on God because they fornicated with the works of their own hands. They were intimate with their own strength, trying to produce the fruit of God's life instead of being intimate with His strength. And so the woman caught in the act of adultery was a picture of all of Israel and a picture of all mankind. We were all caught in the act of adultery. And so when you read the account of the woman caught in the act of adultery, you're not just supposed to see this woman. If that's the beginning of what you see, oh, hallelujah. But you're supposed to then see yourself in that place and see how God will be with you when He finds you in that place. But the woman caught in the act of adultery, that account there is a great illustration of the conviction of sin. In fact, it's a perfect illustration of what the conviction of sin is, and it's no accident that it happens 8 chapters before Jesus talks about the conviction of sin. And in fact, at the end of the account of the woman caught in the act of adultery, do you know what He says? Go and sin no more. And I promise you, when He's saying go and sin no more, that word sin there, He defines later when He says of sin because they believe not on me, or they're in unbelief towards the Father's goodness towards them. So Jesus, in the account of the woman caught in the act of adultery, that woman was not believing in the goodness of God towards her life. She was in unbelief. And because she was in unbelief, she was fornicating with the strength in her own hand to try to produce life. And that was bringing forth all types of the works of the flesh. And then there she stood with the sentence of death hanging over her head, with all of the accusers standing there accusing her, condemning her to death. There she stood. In her heart, she thought it was God who condemned her for her sin. In her heart, she was blind. She couldn't see the goodness of God. It's no secret, or it's no accident that right after the woman caught in the act of adultery, God heals a blind guy. I say God because Jesus is God. Right after that account, He heals a blind person. What is He trying to tell us? The woman was blind. She thought she was an orphan. She thought God despised her for her sin. She thought she was all alone in the cold, heartless little world. She needed that sin of unbelief to be convicted, or for her to be convinced that God was with her. And you know how God convinced her? There's Jesus. He's the Word that was made flesh. He is God. And what does He do? He stands next to the woman as her what? Advocate. And who does He advocate for her against? The accusers. He's not the one accusing. He's not there to accuse. He wasn't there to find fault with her sin. He wasn't there to point at her bad behavior and make her feel shame or guilt. He wasn't there condemning her. In fact, all those things were already present when He showed up. But what was He there to do? Heal her sight. He knew why she was doing what she was doing. She doesn't know the goodness in the Father's heart towards her life. She can't see Him. The death in the world has darkened her understanding. She's blind. We about to bring to light everlasting Father right here with her. We about to open her eyes to the goodness in God's heart towards her. What does He do? He removes the sentence of death that's hanging over her. And He removes the accusers. And then what does He say? Neither do I condemn you. She needed a father. She needed her life to be cared for, and she had very specific needs. She had a sentence of death hanging over her. She was dying. She had people accusing her, gnawing at her. The bulls of Bashan, as the Psalm 22 says, had encompassed her, mocking her, spitting on her, calling for her death, and the death was reigning over her. She needed someone to care for her life. She needed a father. And there's Jesus to be everlasting Father, mighty God, wonderful Counselor, Prince of Peace. And He manifested Himself as all those things right in her midst to heal her sight, to remove unbelief from her heart. So when He says go and sin no more, He's saying go and no longer live in the earth as if you're an orphan. Go and no longer live in the earth as if the Father's the one despising you or uncovering your nakedness. The Father hasn't come and pointed out your nakedness. The Father is with you to clothe your nakedness. That's the conviction of sin. She was being tormented. He comforted her with the revelation of the Father. He gave her the true knowledge of God. That's the conviction of sin. You can even say it this way. The conviction of sin is with the intent to give you the knowledge of the Father. That's the intent. Does that make any sense? Go and sin no more. That's the conviction of sin. What sin? Unbelief in the Father's goodness towards you. You were blind to it before, but I just showed it to you. Go and no longer be blind to the Father's goodness. Right after that, Jesus stands up in the middle of the temple and he says, I'm the light of the world. What do you think that means to Jewish people? He's standing up and declaring himself to be God. I'm the word about God and how he will be with sinners. And I've come here to heal your unbelief. That's the conviction of sin. All those people were believing God condemns sinners. All those people were believing that. And because of that, they were filled with unbelief. If you believe God's the one that condemns sinners, guess what? You ain't coming to God till after you think you cleaned yourself up. And then you become a whitewashed sepulcher where you try to make the outside of the cup clean. All the while, the inside of the cup is filled with lust and lack.